Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Jonathan Levi. Some of you know me from probably Hyperledger Fabric. We do a lot of stuff with Ethereum, and we play with a lot of chains. I was on a TSC for a year last year, and we're very active as a company in open source, blockchain technology, security, digital identity, and our focus this year and probably next year is going to be even more so is interoperability and collaboration. So I'm going to talk about the Unbounded Network, which is a network that we created. Brian introduced us kind of at the beginning as one of the examples of a coin market cap for the enterprise blockchains. We wanted to find a way to bridge between permission chains and public chains, right? So when I started working on blockchain, I actually started on Bitcoin, Lightning Network, and then moved on to Ethereum when it was out, Frontier, like that was 2015. And the main problem that we had back then was regulation, right? I came in as a banker. Let me show you a little bit about my background. I've been through a lot, fortunately and unfortunately. So I spent a lot of time in banking. I spent a lot of time in kind of highly regulated environments where you really care about who is your customer, where the money is coming from, reporting, auditing. And my mindset didn't change, right? When I moved to blockchain and I was looking at a global payment system where you have relatively quick finality, it's very difficult to move stuff in regulated environments, especially when you do any cross-border payments or asset transfer. So I came to the blockchain with that mindset on, and the first thing I wanted is to meet KYC requirements and AML and how to kind of allow participants to join a network, but in an open way while still meeting the regulations, right? So Hyperledger just started, and I jumped on that when I first saw it because it was my hope to get more enterprises and bankers kind of into that space, like financial institutions that needed KYC. So took most of the stuff that I've learned in banking. I did a lot of stuff in networking. I don't know, it was kind of, I'm a mathematician and a cryptographer by training, but over the years I started doing more and more systems and working with more kind of critical systems where things cannot fail. You have to be able to reproduce numbers and build stuff in a much more kind of auditable way, which tied in very well into the blockchain space. So let's talk about the background, why we created this whole thing. So it became very clear that we're not going to have only one blockchain, and people started deploying more than one blockchain. So we had the global Bitcoin network, and then there was the public Ethereum network, and then we started seeing some private Ethereum versions. We started working on Hyperledger Fabric back in the day before it was the open blockchain kind of project. And we wanted to build the membership service component where basically participants can guarantee or have a process of onboarding where we know who the participants are. And to just keep it very simple, if I take a step back, like people have different opinions about what's blockchain, the philosophy, et cetera, but my kind of, the way I look at permission chains is a permission chain is a blockchain where, or even a DLT, where you actually know the validators. So, I don't know, a year ago, people looked at permission chains as like private chains, protected chains, something that you run in the basement, which was okay for POCs, but you see in 2018 that like more stuff is going to production. So I don't look at permission chains as a private network, I look at it as a network that can be publicly accessible. If you look at Hyperledger Fabric, you look at Sawtooth, if you look at what you can do with DID and Indy, you can always take an identity or an identifier and allow somebody, grant them the access to a network under conditions, right? You want to have, I don't know, you want to do a token, I don't know, a token raise where you want to allow only accredited investors in, right? We also got security tokens. You want to allow a collaboration between financial institutions that have to meet a set of criteria. So that's where you really need the permission chains that kind of Hyperledger is kind of mostly around. And I still argue that you still need to connect to a public chain. So it's very difficult to work with kind of only permission chains that are disconnected. And in a way, at the beginning, and I was kind of guilty as well, when we started doing a lot of POCs, we created a few silos because we had like a few people or organizations that were happy with a small set of a chain that actually had high value and it was very critical, but we still couldn't connect them, all right? So back in the day, we kind of started looking at it, and I always believed that there would be more than one chain, and now we see it. Yeah, 2 years later, we were right. But the problem that we saw is that many people kind of getting into the space, and by the way, please ignore token prices, because that's like, yeah, I know it's a little bit of a volatile market, but yeah. But we started looking at, and this is just an example, there are many more players, as you know, how many members we have in Hyperledger, Ethereum, Enterprise Alliance, and there are other people that are just trying to look into blockchain, but the big kind of players started talking about, okay, let's have a DLT or a blockchain or a framework that everybody can use. Yes, stuff was open source, but back in the day, I'm sorry to say that they didn't talk to each other that well, right? IBM was running into kind of, you know, Fabric, and the Fabric ecosystem actually grew. Fabric 1.0, we had 27 or 28 organizations. Intel was pushing Sawtooth because they were trying to do a lot of stuff with SGX. R3 was kind of basically built and kind of got all the banks around a consortium. So we saw like different consortiums and different frameworks, and my concern was, okay, we need to collaborate, right? How are we going to do it, right? So, and we participated, right? We work with the Bitcoin core guys. I contribute to Ethereum, spend a lot of time with IBM Fabric, and not just IBM Fabric, but anyone in the Fabric ecosystem that can come in. I was a maintainer, right? I was an ELM maintainer. I was a release manager of 1.0, still active on 1.3, 1.4, helping with the identity mixer kind of component. So we're still involved with all of them, but we felt that there was kind of, you know, what are we going to do together, right? Another step back, HACERA basically created kind of a way to look at permissioning in a much more granular way, and it was, our vision was to be a little bit blockchain agnostic. It's difficult because these frameworks were moving a lot, but we were trying to think about, okay, if I want to do more than just KYC, we were looking at permissioning in who can see what, who can do what, who can write, how I can access a network, and I wanted to also revoke rights of participants that don't, I don't know, let's say misbehave, right? So why did you want to do permissioning? And you know, all the guys here that are in financial institutions or are sitting in any kind of healthcare or highly regulated space for whatever reason, you have so many kind of restrictions and risk in having a super open chain, but you also have other issues when it's too closed, right? Like if you can't run a POC with only 4 people in somebody's lab, right? So this is why we were thinking, let's have this permissioning in a much more kind of flexible way that is kind of, if I look at the spectrum of, okay, everything is public like a Twitter kind of, you know, post, everything is like shared with everybody, or the other way is like we're really closely guarding everything to a point where my blockchain technology or my whole kind of POC is running in somebody's lab. We need to find somewhere, kind of some middle ground, right? So our approach was, we realized we're not as big as the big players that are coming into the space, right? So very early on, we decided not to have our own blockchain and not to come to any of the partners, customers, I don't know, friends, organizations that we work with. Our attitude was, we're not here to displace your blockchain. Like, we didn't want to come in, Fabric is better than this, Coda is that. Like, we were saying, okay, you probably did your due diligence and you tried enough and you know what you're doing. Let me see how I can help you meet regulations and actually connect different blockchains, or just have different data sets that interact. Okay, this is how we started kind of, and this is why we worked a lot with Fabric, we played a lot with Sawtooth, and we're trying to sit on top actually, while still contributing back to the framework. So our dream was basically to have a framework where we can move data around, right? Data can be a currency, any asset transfer, and to be able to work with all these chains, but in a secure way. So that was kind of the next level. Let me see what I've done here, not interesting. We have some other values, but I'm not going to talk too much about HACERA. I want to talk about the Unbounded, right? So this is us back in the day. We had a lot of partnerships. And then we kind of started to kind of think about how we can have like the public mainnet of Hyperledger Fabric, Sawtooth, and all these permission chains, right? That was kind of the vision back in the day. And we already had a lot of partnerships in place. We already worked with a few cloud providers. We just wanted to be able to allow somebody to run Fabric on different clouds, to run anything that he wants to look up with Stella, but not to really work all the way to create your own fork of something when things are available online, okay? So I wanted to talk a little bit about some, so there are many use cases, there are many sectors, right? But in the end, like, I can talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it too much. We looked at the different cryptocurrencies and all these tables and what people need to do and like all these tokens, and we still saw that these are very similar problems, right? Some of them you really need the permission chains, but other times you want to share data, okay? That's an example that is not really relevant. But here's an interesting kind of concept that people talked about for a long time. Like many financial institutions, we're talking about, let's share KYC, right? So I'm going to do KYC once, and then I want to share it with my counterparties, right? But when you work in a bank or in financial institutions, or like when you, like in any sector, the problem that we saw, and like many people are sharing it now, we all started talking about a consortium or a way to work with the blockchain in order to collaborate and share data. But very early on, when you have a sector-based solution, your participants are actually competitors, right? So it doesn't matter if you have hospitals trying to share trial data, or if you have banks trying to save the KYC that is pretty expensive and time-consuming, and actually it's not a nice usability, right, for me to move from one bank to another. But the problem was that even if you have this KYC and a portal, I still have a lot of issues, right, with privacy, what I can share with whom, let alone the fact that not everybody is still built into this kind of notion of changing the business model to work with blockchain, right? So these are all very good ideas that we saw in practice. We needed to have this kind of permissioned to public kind of connectivity, let alone that just permissioned enough just to be able to list stuff and to find and discover what's out there was not in existence, right? So we started working with, it was the Fabric ecosystem back in the day. We started connecting different chains, and we started, it all started like, we first wanted to do it. I was in a hackathon like a year and a half ago. That was the Coinbase hackathon. It was a week before we released kind of the first release candidate of Hyperledger Fabric 1.0. And in that hackathon, we actually created a chess game where somebody can create a decentralized identifier, like a DID, and then go and play chess kind of anonymously. And the reward was paid in ETH. So we connected kind of the Ethereum blockchain, go through the Indie sovereign kind of network to get an identifier. Then you go and play chess actually on Sawtooth. And once you get the result, you go and you get your reward in ETH. And it was kind of a nice kind of composition. It's the first time, I think we introduced like the concept of multi-chain atomic swap that is between more than two parties. We didn't patent anything. There were like 5 ICOs that copied it and raised a lot of money, and now they'll pay lawyers a lot of money for it. But the idea was, okay, I can't work always in a silo, but I still need to be able to have a token, even though in Fabric, for example, we didn't want to have a token baked into the system at the time. We didn't want to have like a currency. But still, if you have a way to audit transactions and to look at everything, it's a waste not to use the connectivity to the mainnet, okay? So we've done a lot of that later on, and then we actually made a product and a platform out of it. But the idea is to be able to have, for example, Stellar payment, Ethereum payment, have a sovereign identity with a sovereign identifier, and then connect to different Hyperledger kind of technologies if you want to work with permission chains. So kind of the vision, I don't know, I think 2019, you'll see more of that. This is a slide that actually was created by, to be honest, IBM. And the idea was to have the Unbounded connecting these different chains, and we wanted to be able to move data around and currency around, but I'll be honest with you, we wanted to run a platform. We didn't want to become an exchange. We didn't want to pump token. We didn't want to do KYC. So we wanted to provide the framework for others to integrate their chains. So I'll show in a second like how it looks like, but actually that's a bit technical, so if you guys want to talk about that, we can. So let's talk about the Unbounded, right? By the way, any questions? Stop me at any time. Yes, please.
So this is kind of another chain of chains.
It's a chain of chains. It's a network of networks, yes.
The concept, presumably, that there can be more vendors coming in and more chains of chains.
Oh, totally. Totally.
Is there anything, and maybe this is Brian also, is there anything that looks like a DNS of chains?
Yeah.
In terms of protocol, or how do I find a chain that I'm permissioned to see?
Well, that's a great.
DNS server?
Yeah, well, guys, I didn't prepare this question in advance. Thank you so much for asking. Right, so yeah, that's a very good question, right? So first question is, how, like, this is a network of networks, right? So using a blockchain to connect different blockchains. So actually another question that people usually ask is, why did I need another blockchain? I'll talk about it in a second. But the second question is, yeah, it's true. We don't have a naming system today, right? If I want to move data around from chain 1 to chain B, we know that there's a big problem. I can't use IP addresses of a node because it changes, right? Or it's behind some firewall. And there are some naming mechanisms, right? So there is a project that does naming on Bitcoin. ENS, the Ethereum naming services, they have an auction where you can try to claim a name. So all the ICOs, right, they have a token, and they wanted it to be unique. So you basically bid, and then you wait, I don't know, 48 hours or 72 hours, depends on the protocol. If there's no kind of friction or any dispute, you will get the name, and as long as your money is there, you keep it. But the ENS was working only for Ethereum. So that were Ethereum naming services, right? And even to go to Ethereum now, and to look up names, you have to run. So there are two options, right? Like, the correct way is to download all the past transactions. So you have to keep an Ethereum synchronized node. That's like a tera plus of data. It takes 2 weeks on an IBM mainframe, right? So just to tell you like how heavy it is if you really want to validate signatures, etc. To keep the node in sync is also a pain because you have so many. So for example, right? And I'm bashing Ethereum a little bit, but I'm trying to help them fix it. So don't get it in a bad way. So Ethereum has this.
Still have a file from 1985 on one of our computers of all the IP nodes in the internet.
Yeah. So, okay, so.
But people stopped doing it, right?
By the way, everybody here knows what's a DNS, right? Any question about what's a DNS? Right, we're trying to have a domain name system, right? Services, where I'm going to connect like google.com to the Google server, right? Then I get to the first endpoint of Google, and this is kind of my face, right? So Facebook, CNN, all of them have like clusters of servers, but the naming service is what I have when I buy a domain, right? So the question is, how do we have a DNS for blockchain? And to be honest, I don't know if we're going to have only one. We created one because we needed one, right? And we wanted to create one that is not, it's like blockchain specific, right? So we wanted it to work with Sawtooth and with Fabric and with Ethereum, et cetera, et cetera. And we didn't want to charge for it. Like our big thing, we didn't want to make money from the names. So we took a completely crazy approach. We just went to the vendors and we asked them to help us build this. So they sponsored the development. And we didn't want them to own it. It's kind of a shared thing. And if you look here to the left menu, oh, where's my slides? I didn't understand why everybody's looking at me finally. So yeah, give me a second. I just mirrored the display so that, I don't know why. Give me a second. Only problem is finding the cursor on that side of the world. Okay, I'm going to take the risk of. Give me a second. Let's I'll just mirror display once and then it's going to be okay. I can still talk while I'm doing it. So the idea was to create a naming service that is actually sits on top of the blockchains. So it's not going to be like an Ethereum specific one, or Fabric or Sawtooth or Coda or any permission chain. We're collaborating now with Coda. We're creating like a big partnership on getting some of the certified applications listed onto the Unbounded, but they will be the ones that are certifying kind of the dApps, but we'll still be able to kind of list them out. But the idea was to be able to move data in a way that it's auditable and reproducible, right? So the main problem that you have in blockchains in general, yes, it's not the fastest, and yes, we are wasting a lot of storage because everybody keeps a copy of everything, but there is a huge value in being able to reproduce numbers, right? So we wanted to have a system where when I'm making a DNS resolution request, so I'm saying what is the IP of google.com, I would like to be able to verify that I got the right data and I used it and I can even use it in a smart contract. So that was like it's actually more than a directory, right? Like the idea is if I want to resolve a name and go to a chain and request some data, even the name resolution is part of the result and I can always replay this and then make sure that my response and my contract is actually deterministic. So I didn't want to make two different calls and get different numbers, or somebody would change the DNS, and then I'll never be able to go to the same request, right? So that's why we created it with a blockchain. We used Hyperledger Fabric. we could have done it with different chains. Like honestly, we work with like, I don't know, 5 chains every day. So that was not the issue. The issue was to actually make it like very interoperable and to make it clear and how to use stuff in a very, I don't know, seamless way, right? So I'll show what we can do. I just need to be able to use my computer at some point. I don't know why it doesn't work. One second. Maybe I'll just do this. I want to show you how it looks, and then you'll see that we created a very consistent way of looking at different blockchains, and they all look the same. Kind of, if I look at a blockchain explorer on Fabric or a blockchain explorer on Sawtooth, we made it look like you have blocks and transactions, and you can fetch the data. You can request for a block number, and even in public chain world, this process is not unified. Like, you want to go to Bitcoin, you go to, I don't know, block info, right? If you want to go to Ethereum, you go to Etherscan. If you go to Fabric, look, you have to understand, we are using a lot of Hyperledger technologies, right? We are using the Hyperledger Explorer. The problem was not how to run it, because all the cloud providers, they'll provide you an Explorer. So we're using that. But how do you connect it to the chain, right? How do you get access to the data that you can share in the permission chain, right? That's the difficulty. The difficulty is actually to make these permission chains choose what they share and what they don't share. Because in Fabric you have channels, in Sawtooth you have like transaction families, in Stellar, that different technologies are doing something very similar in terms of kind of conditional sharing. Actually, I don't even need, if you guys go to like unbounded.hacera.com, you'll just be able to see. I don't know why my computer doesn't help. I can try to restart everything, but I'll try to restart everything. It just died. But the idea is that I'll be able to go, so let's sorry, question? 5 minutes. So let's talk about what we can do with Unbounded, right? The easiest thing, first of all, the whole system is free. So you can just go in, create a user. If you have a network, whether it's Fabric, Ethereum, Code, like whatever it is, you can get your name. This name is unique, at least in this system. We have a dispute resolution mechanism which ENS, for example, doesn't have. So you cannot reserve a name that is trademarked that is not yours. So we have a procedure where when you make a request, we look at it and actually there is a consensus mechanism. At the moment, it's just the partners that sponsored, but we would like to expand it, no problem. Oh, it did die. My computer is back. Okay, open. And the idea is, let me see if it's gonna load. I really hope it's gonna load. Sorry, 1 second. I don't know why I can't see it on the screen, sorry. I can just share my slides. I'll share my slides anyway, but yeah. So if you guys go to like Unbounded.network, you'll be able to see like 3 things. You can sign up and create a user for free. You can register a network if the name is not taken. So you can reserve your Fabric network, your Sawtooth network, etc., etc. And the highlight of the thing, if you go to any network, you'll be able to look at whatever is public. So if I look at the FabCar example, we have our Duchess example on Sawtooth. If you look at any kind of public or permission chain, you'll be able to look at all the previous blocks and transactions, search, find stuff. And actually we have a REST API that allows you to integrate. So I can fetch data from even a permission chain if I'm allowed to get, if I have the permission to access this data. So 3 things that you can easily do, right? You can look up networks. So it's this kind of the discoverability. You can list your own networks and start interoperating so you can know what's out there. And I think the biggest thing that is going to be like much more useful when people develop stuff with the Unbounded is to be able to fetch, I don't know why. Yeah. No, but even the HDMI thing.
Jonathan, maybe some Q&A.
Yeah. So actually, any questions?
Yeah. So to get. Okay, so is it intended to be be a directory of like, even if people are doing proofs of concept or kind of demo stuff? Or
Yes.
is it, okay. So,
Yeah, that's a great question. So
how will somebody tell the difference between like production quality, like kinds of things? And,
yeah, so, I will not have time to show it, but basically we can classify. So you can list out a project, you can reserve a name now, even if it's like a proof of concept, if you're just trying to do something as a university thing, if you're trying to do something in your innovation lab, it doesn't matter. You can still list it out. We have ranks, so you can say this is an alpha, this is a beta, and you can also have the terms and conditions of what you expect. For example, there are some networks that allow only US residents to join.
and do you plan to do an aliveness test? Like to tell the different, like a network that was registered and it's no longer running?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
No, thank you. So the problem that we had at the beginning, we were worried because we didn't charge, because we don't charge for listing, that everybody is going to list out stuff and we're not going to know if it's a real network or not, right? So the question was, do we put like a barrier of like, I don't know, $10 a year or something like that? Or we just make it easy and just ping the network and see if it responds? So we also have a mechanism where you can give us your API that we can query and we can see if it's live. So our blockchain explorer is basically querying your network and fetches data, just like I do in Ethereum and Bitcoin. We do the exact same thing in permission chains. So we started integrating with many clouds, so IBM, Oracle, now we're working with Microsoft, and we're trying to get it into the process of when you go to one of the cloud providers and you get a blockchain as a service platform, you will have, it's probably come up closely, I think it's going to be like September in the next version of 3 cloud providers, and you can actually automatically register your BaaS environment on the Unbounded registry. So you reserve the name and you can interoperate. And we work with the cloud providers to make sure that it's very easy to integrate. They also invested in this, so it's kind of a nice channel to have. But it's important for us to always be able to know that networks are real. But even if your network is really just in an alpha stage or under development, I think it's much better to kind of list it out so people know what you are doing, and you need to also, you have the ability to also talk about what you are looking for. So some networks are looking for developers. Other networks are looking for participants, right? So you build a blockchain. How do you scale in terms of like more companies joining? Other networks are saying, look, we're just looking for validators. Do you want to run a validator node? And this is how you run it. So yeah, great, thanks, thank you. Yeah, just when I needed it. Yeah, so you don't have to be in production. You can start, walk, and then run. Yeah.
I guess a follow-up to that, to my previous question.
Yes.
On DNS is once you find a network, how do you know it really exists? And how do you know it's not being spoofed?
So actually, we have some nice technologies there, right? So the one thing that people wanted, so we work with highly regulated environments, right? So I'll give you like very nice use cases that are very specific, but there is and there's some patents and this is like the enterprise stuff, so it's a little bit heavy, but some networks want to have a proof of existence, meaning I would like to show that something occurred for real. And I want to be able to see that somebody signed it and it was really there and nobody is spoofing it, right? But the problem is that in permission space, I can't share with you all my customer information as a bank. But I do want to tell you, hey, Jonathan did pay. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with the validators, and you can, so one big feature that we're adding now, you can query a network for its validators. You want to know who is running the show. Okay, so especially in permission chains, like let's say financial sector, you want to know who are the banks that are actually validating stuff, and you need to choose whether you trust the signature or not. So you can get the public key, and when I give you a transaction, you can verify a signed transaction with their private key. Then it's up to you if you want to trust it or not, but at least you get the signature without looking at everything. This is part of the stuff of not being binary, right? Like all or nothing. It's that. Next feature, if you're interested, like you know MSP, the membership service provider. So on all Fabric networks in the world, we're going to allow people to register the MSP. So when you want to join a network, you can see the MSP and you say, hey, do I trust these guys or not? And then you choose whether you want to share. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff like that. I think I'm running out of time.
Probably one more question,
Yeah.
then, because the other sessions are getting
Sure.
started, so one more.
Yes, please.
Just trying to understand the concept is you have a sort of a connector which connects to multiple blockchains.
Yes.
You can understand the case of a public blockchain like Ethereum or Bitcoin,
Mhm.
which is public and therefore the formats are known, you can't pull the data out and
Of course.
interpret it.
So you run a node, right? Like in public ones, we have a node on each of them. So we have an Ethereum node synchronized, we have a blockchain, a Bitcoin one. So in public, we just join the consortium.
Right, so
In
it's a
permission,
network and you can interpret data.
but that's easy, right? Public, by definition, anyone can join. Like there's no kind of, yeah? Permission, there are two options. We either run our own node if you trust us, and you can limit what this node can see, like in Fabric channels or in Sawtooth you can have transaction families. In permission, is actually more of this permission stuff is easy to permission, right? Because the definition they baked in the permissioning. But we don't have to be intrusive. We can also give you an API where you can answer our queries. We have a standard that we share with all these guys. This is what we do with the cloud providers. And if you adhere to this API, we can query your network. So you can choose what you share. The only thing that we do is cache, so that we don't, like if I get because this is all behind firewalls and stuff, like we get denial of service attacks, but we don't want to bombard your network, right? So if I see that we make too many queries, we just cache it and reply it on your behalf. Yeah.
Right. We should probably wrap up because the other sessions
Sure.
started, but we don't have to clear the room. So if you do want to get to the other workshops, feel free at this point.
And if you have questions, please.
Why don't we thank Jonathan for
Thank you.